bronze statue of freedom is the crowning feature of the dome of the United States Capitol. The statue was first hoisted to its place of honor in 1863. It remained atop the dome for 130 years. But the ravages of wind and weather had taken their toll, so freedom came to Earth by helicopter to the Capitol Plaza for a facelift. The statue and pedestal were completely restored in 5 months. The replacement of the Statue of Freedom was the centerpiece of the 1993 bicentennial celebration of the United States Capitol.
And at the summit of the dome now, there in sunshine, the emblem of freedom is again in her place. Older by a generation than the Statue of Liberty, she has stood on high since the year 1863, since the autumn of Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. She has weathered Civil War, World War. She has been pelted by sleet and snow and struck by lightning. And she has seen triumphant times. Never has she looked better than today, all newly, thoroughly refurbished, ready for another 200 years or more.
The restoration of the Statue of Freedom, as we call it, on top of the Capitol Dome is a fascinating project from a number of standpoints. Historical, technological, restoration technique standpoints. But I think most important is its symbolism. The symbolism begins, of course, with the fact that it's on top of the Capitol Dome, which is a symbol of freedom and democracy everywhere in the world. What started out as pure restoration of a work of art turned into a major engineering project. There were excellent people involved from beginning to end with this entire process. The engineering people, the conservation people, the helicopter people, our own people who did the restoration of the pedestal. It was very well done from beginning to end.
People often call my office to ask, what is that statue on top of the Capitol? Is it an Indian? Is it Pocahontas? Well, it is not an Indian despite the feathered headdress. It is an allegorical figure representing the concept of freedom.
The Statue of Freedom is a classical female figure with long curling hair dressed in flowing drapes. Her right hand rests upon a sheathed sword, while her left holds a laurel wreath of victory and the shield of the United States with 13 stripes. Her helmet is encircled by 9 stars and features a unique crest composed of an eagle's head, feathers, and talons, a reference to the costume of Native Americans. A brooch inscribed U.S. secures her robe, which is trimmed with fur and decorative balls. On the dome, she stands on a cast-iron pedestal. The globe is encircled with the motto, E pluribus unum. The lower part of the pedestal is decorated with wreaths and bundles of rods, the fasces symbolizing governmental authority. 10 bronze points are attached to the headdress, shoulders, and shield for protection from lightning. The bronze statue stands 19½ feet tall and weighs about 15,000 pounds. The crest of her helmet rises 288 feet above the East Front Plaza. The Statue of Freedom was created to crown the new cast-iron dome designed by Thomas U. Walter and authorized by Congress in 1855. Walter sketched a classical figure of liberty on his first drawing for the dome. The superintendent of construction, Montgomery C. Meigs, asked Thomas Crawford, an American sculptor working in Rome, to design the statue. Crawford was working on other Capitol sculptures, including the Senate pediment. Meigs wrote to Crawford,
"We have too many Washingtons. We have America in the pediment. Victories and liberties are rather pagan emblems, but a liberty, I fear, is the best we can get."
Crawford created a small model of an allegorical figure he called Freedom Triumphant in War and Peace. It was wearing a wreath of wheat and laurel and holding an olive branch and striped shield of the United States. After Crawford received a photograph of Walter's drawing, he redesigned the statue. Crawford's second design was completed in October of 1855. Freedom now held a shield and wreath. Crawford also added a sheathed sword, ready for use whenever needed. She now stood on a globe and wore a sleeveless Greek dress and a liberty cap.
The Phrygian or liberty cap was worn by freed slaves in ancient Rome. It had been adopted as a symbol of liberty during the American and French revolutions. It appears in many places throughout the Capitol, such as this liberty behind me here in the Bermuda Corridor. But the man in charge of the construction of the dome, Secretary of War Jefferson Davis, strongly disapproved of the use of the liberty cap.
Its history renders it inappropriate to a people who were born free and would not be enslaved.
Following Davis's suggestion, Crawford replaced the liberty cap with a helmet encircled with stars. He added a crest of an eagle's head and a bold arrangement of feathers. Crawford draped the figure in a heavy fringed robe. Davis approved this third design in April of 1856. Crawford created a statue in clay and had it cast in plaster in 5 main sections. The model, which Mrs. Crawford referred to as the monster statue, was completed in his studio in Rome in February of 1857. Soon afterwards, Crawford went blind. In October of that year, he died suddenly at the age of 44 from a brain tumor.
Here is the model that Crawford's widow had packed into 6 crates. She arranged for them to be shipped from Italy aboard a small sailing vessel, the Emily Taylor. It set sail in the spring of 1858, but soon sprang leaks and was nearly lost at sea. The ship stopped at Gibraltar for repairs, but later storms caused more leaks, and cargo had to be jettisoned in order to save the model. The ship was forced to land again in Bermuda, where it was condemned. Half of the crates were sent by mistake to New York in December, with the rest left behind. It took until March of 1859, nearly 3 years after work on the model had begun, for all sections to arrive in Washington.
Clark Mills, a self-taught American sculptor with a foundry on Bladensburg Road, just a few miles from the Capitol, was commissioned to cast the statue in April of 1860. Instead of paying Mills the $25,000 he requested, the government agreed to rent his foundry and pay for all labor and materials. 15,000 pounds of copper, 1,500 pounds of tin, and 200 pounds of zinc. Before the statue could be cast, the model, which was on display in the Capitol, had to be taken apart. When the worker who had plastered it together demanded extra pay, Philip Reed, a highly skilled slave owned by Mills, figured out how to do it. Reed was one of the workers paid $1.25 a day to cast the sections in bronze. Like all large bronze statues, Freedom was formed hollow to minimize weight and cost. Mills used the sand casting method to produce the 5 main sections and separate details, such as the balls and stars, in bronze. Work was halted only briefly because of the outbreak of the Civil War, and Mills completed the casting in 1862 for about $20,000. The plaster model was put on display in Statuary Hall and later taken apart and stored. In 1890, it was transferred to the Smithsonian Institution in 100 pieces. Clark Mills' son, Theodore Augustus Mills, plastered it back together. It stood in the rotunda of the Smithsonian's Arts and Industries building until 1967, when it was sawed in 2 and put in storage. Finally, in late 1992, it was brought back to Capitol Hill and restored for permanent display in the basement rotunda of the Senate Russell Building.
In the spring of 1862, sections of the completed bronze statue arrived at the Capitol in 4 wagons. Freedom was assembled for temporary display on the east grounds. Walter had hoped the dome would be ready so that the statue could be raised on July 4, 1863, but it wasn't finished until late November. Before being steam hoisted to the top of the dome, the bronze sections were pickled in various acids to clean them and create a surface that would turn a bronze green.
The cold and wind made the work of hoisting the sections difficult. Finally, on December 2, 1863, at 12 noon, the statue's last section was bolted into place. A large flag was flown over Freedom's head. A 35-gun salute, representing the 35 states in the Union, then divided by Civil War, was answered from the guns at each of the 12 forts protecting the city. Walter wrote about the occasion.
I have succeeded in putting on the head of the statue without accident. Her ladyship looks placid and beautiful, much better than I expected. There was an immense crowd to witness the operation, and everything was done with propriety and with dignity.
Once safely in place, Freedom was periodically washed with soap and water. In 1913, the men cleaning the statue took a photograph of themselves up at the head of the statue.
When the dome was repainted in 1959, the statue tie rods were replaced, but the surface was left untouched, since it was believed that the green corrosion was protective. We now know that every time the bronze gets wet, the corrosion becomes active and a little more metal is lost. For decades, the only attention given to the statue was checking the lightning points and caulking the seams when the dome was repainted.
One of the obligations of the painting contractor was to replace or sharpen, remove and sharpen and replace the platinum lightning rod points which are attached to the statue, which were done a number of years ago. And in 1988, when that was done, the painter came down with a piece of bronze about as big as the palm of your hand in his hand, saying this had come off the statue as he was examining it or working on it. Well, that began to call it to our attention very forcefully, and so we decided we would examine it while his ladders were up there. And there wasn't any doubt that it was deteriorating perhaps more rapidly in recent years than it had in the past, and therefore that we needed to do something about it.
In 1991, a conservation and engineering study of the statue was funded through the United States Capitol Preservation Commission. The statue and pedestal were thoroughly examined inside and out. The surface of the bronze was found to be extremely pitted, the result of air bubbles that had formed during the casting. A long crack and rust on the pedestal presented further evidence the statue and pedestal should be separated. Engineers and conservators outlined the various treatment options.
The question of whether we should remove it from the top of the dome in order to restore it arose, and recognizing that if we did need to remove it, we couldn't just wrap a rope around it and pick it up. It was going to have a cage built around it so that it could be lifted from the bottom. As a result of that, we examined the issue of whether or not we should try to restore it in place. It became apparent that that was going to be a major problem, not only because of access, but because of cost associated with working at that height and in the wind and et cetera, and bringing all the materials up there and carting them all back down again. It turned out that that was going to take twice as long and be twice as costly, and that it would be less expensive and more desirable from the restoration standpoint to take it down where it could be worked on the ground and carefully examined in every way, so that we weren't going to overlook anything by virtue of the difficulties of working up 280 feet in the air. So we decided to take it down, and that became an engineering challenge.
The United States Capitol Preservation Commission provided $780,000 in privately raised funds to cover the entire cost of the restoration project, including the structural engineering, the scaffolding, and the rigging. A specialized hoist was used to hydraulically ferry scaffolding components and tools from the ground to the dome. The most dangerous part in the removal process was separating the statue from its base so that the steel lifting ring could be inserted. Following the plan devised by the engineering firm, Cagley & Associates, workers installed a jack at the base of the pedestal so that the statue could be raised up a few inches at a time. Engineer Gary Strand explains the process.
So what we're doing is lifting the column up. We're going to put a pin in a collar to hold the weight, and then we're going to shim under the jack and then jack some more after we pull the pin. So it's just a two-stage thing, because the jack is only about this big, and it only has, like I say, a travel distance of about 6.5 inches.
The 6 bolts were removed, and the lifting ring was inserted under the statue in pieces, welded together and bolted to the statue. A special cradle was designed to protect the statue. Wire cables were connected to the lifting ring and frame, and a nylon harness provided extra support. The helicopter chosen to make the lift was the Sikorsky S-64F Sky Crane, nicknamed Bubba. After nearly 130 years in place, on May 9, 1993, at 6:30 in the morning, the Statue of Freedom was lifted off the Capitol dome. the result of months of preparation and coordination by hundreds of people.
Easy up, easy up, easy up, easy up. Clear the base. Clear the scaffolding. Take her to the ground.
Freedom landed softly, as it turned out, on the East Plaza, where she would remain on view for the public throughout the entire restoration process. Work on the pedestal took place atop the dome simultaneously. The conservator chosen for the restoration of the statue was Linda Merck Gould. She has over 20 years' experience in the field of outdoor sculpture conservation and is a fellow of the American Institute for Conservation.
The importance of the Freedom Statue can't be underestimated between whether it's for the American public or even within the conservation circles. It was a very important project and one that we were quite thrilled to be involved with. Our first real look at it was only once the scaffolding was up and the project was underway, and then our best examination came when it was actually lifted down to the ground and the entire sculpture could be scaffolded. And so we had a few surprises there as we went along. When we went through, we were amazed with the amount of porosity that was in the bronze. Some of that was related to weathering, some of it was related to the alloy that was used in the bronze composition to cast the statue and its reaction to the environment.
Another surprise came about when magnet tests revealed the presence of iron inside the bronze. X-rays disclosed that the main problem was in the feathers, where the rusting iron had expanded and broken through the bronze. The feathers were cast in a separate piece held on by one large bolt, and they were easily lifted off so that the iron left from the casting process could be removed. The eagle's head itself was attached to the cap-like helmet. The first step in conserving the statue, determining the best method of corrosion removal. Different techniques had been considered during the 1991 study. Experts from the Smithsonian and other museums were called in for their advice. The goal was to reach the brown cuprite layer immediately on top of the bronze.
I have the feeling, we're going to test it of course, but I have the feeling that the water pressure is going to be the way to go.
Water blasting had been successfully used by the conservator on the Garfield Memorial and other outdoor bronzes. After extensive testing of various water pressures and walnut shell blasting, test areas were examined under a microscope by expert consultants. The most effective cleaning method was determined to be water blasting at 4,000 pounds per square inch. The seams between the sections had been covered with caulk. Covering a 1/8 inch thick gap was now a 3-inch span of various caulks turned dark by pollution. The water blasting not only removed the corrosion, but also was effective in removing the tenacious caulk at the joints. Once the surface was cleaned, it was clear that there were numerous deep pits all over the statue.
So once we went through and we looked at the entire surface, there was a priority set up to try and determine how many of these pits really needed to be filled. And in the end, it totaled over 700, which was quite a surprise to us. We had initially anticipated doing less than 100.
The bronze varies from paper thin to 2 inches thick. The average thickness is about 3/8 of an inch. The plugs and patches were made of an alloy matching the original formula. After the major holes were plugged, the next step was to find the right patina color.
With the patina color, we were looking for a color as close to the historical documentation as we could find, and that was referenced as a bronze green. Now, what's bronze green? That's a great debate.
A paint fragment left a clue. The pedestal had been painted to match the original color of the statue. Workers restoring the pedestal found a bit of the original olive green paint at the end of an inserted piece of a wreath. The sample was analyzed and the paint specially mixed to create a bronze green. The restoration of the 18.5-foot cast iron pedestal was done by the architect of the Capitol's construction branch with advice from sculpture conservator Nicholas Velos of the National Park Service. The pedestal was cleaned by stripping and mild sandblasting down to the bare metal. To determine if there was a need to dismantle the globe, a tiny video camera on a fiber optic cable was inserted. 2 hours of videotape were collected. No evidence of major rust or structural problems was found. The crack was repaired by cold welding. The pedestal was coated with a 2-part polyurethane system with its custom mixed color. A door was created at the base of the pedestal to provide access for future maintenance. Simultaneously, on the ground, the statue was being repatinated to a bronze green.
We started in the middle on the back where we had done the tests, and the color went on just as our test areas had indicated. Well, as soon as we changed to a different cast section, the surface went a purpley brown instead of a brown green, and we stopped. And so we realized that we'd have to take a slightly different approach in recoloring the surface for each section in order to achieve a uniform appearance. So we ended up applying to the heated bronze surface chemicals that varied slightly in concentration, and we built up layer after layer and blended until we achieved a uniform base. And then on that base of color, that base color, we then started applying the bronze green that we were looking to achieve, and we were able to get them to all visually blend. A definite challenge. I think it looks wonderful, the color on the Statue of Freedom. For me, it really achieves the bronze green that we were trying to achieve on it.
A 3-part protective coating was applied. First came benzotriazole, a corrosion inhibitor. Second, a special acrylic lacquer, Incrolac, was brushed and then sprayed on. Finally, several layers of wax were brushed on to protect the Incrolac. Any seams where water could enter were invisibly caulked. Weep holes were created to allow any interior moisture to escape. While it was on the ground, the interior of the statue was also refurbished. Old paint was removed and the surface inspected for problems. New white paint will make any future leaks easy to see. The last step was to raise the statue so the lifting ring could be painted. Freedom was returned safely to her place atop the dome by the same helicopter. Again, with close coordination between the 2 helicopter pilots and the riggers, she landed on her pedestal and was bolted back in place. The statue is scheduled to be inspected, washed, and re-waxed about every 2 years.
I said in the beginning that when we took it down that I had a one-way ticket out of the country in case something were to have happened, but as it turns out, I didn't need it. With the naked eye, you can see detail on the statue, the face, the robe that is part of the costume, the sword, the shield is all very visible from the ground, which it never was before. I think it's, the results are spectacular. So the result has been not only a matter of restoration from the standpoint of protecting it for the future, but it's now a very enjoyable work of art to view even from 300 feet away.